I got off the big yellow school bus and walked to the front of my building. It was one of those white buildings in the North Bronx between the Grand Concourse and Marshallou Parkway. I walked up the steps and looked around. No one was waiting for me. Terrified, I sat down on the step and cried. I was 3 years old. One by one, the mothers who lived in the building came by after picking up their children after school. They looked at me, sitting there crying, and continued. The next one, and the next one, and the next one. They looked at me and went straight into the building. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Ruth, a friend of my mother's, came by and said, "Carol, what's wrong?" I said, "No one picked me up," I blubbered. "Well, come with me," she said. It wasn't until later that I realized why the women avoided my mother. And that was because they felt she looked down at them. She was very proud at having a career. Okay. So that was what my life was like from until I was 6. There was a parade of different women who would come by, who would take care of me, but I never really feel they cared about me. I don't remember their names. I don't remember what they looked like. I don't remember them. When I was 6 years old, around bedtime, my mother came into my bedroom and introduced me to a woman named Mamie Durante. She was going to be our housekeeper, and she was going to make me lunch and pick me up after school, and I wouldn't have to be worried about being left alone anymore. Mamie Durante was an African-American woman from Philadelphia. She was a single parent and had a daughter, Annette, who was 2 years older than me. She once told me that her grandfather had been a slave. I wanted to know more about him, but she never seemed comfortable talking about him. So, things changed for much better for me at that point. She brought some safety and stability into the house. When my brother Jerry was 4 years old, he just couldn't understand how Mamie could always see what he was doing even when her back was turned. He just couldn't figure it out. And Mamie, finally got tired of his constantly asking how she could do this. And she finally said to him, "All black people have eyes behind their head." Okay. So, of course, he had to see this for himself, so he got a stool, climbed up, and he parted her hair and searched for her eyes. No matter how many times he did it, no matter how hard he looked, he could never find those eyes. Mamie never let on. This is the kid with the PhD, hard to imagine. When I was 10 in 1955, it was the first year that the Dodgers won the the World Series. I know. What was a girl nice Jewish girl in the Bronx being a Dodgers fan? Well, Mamie was a Dodgers fan, as were most African Americans at that time. So we would watch the game. The games all started before 3 o'clock in those days. So I would race home from school, and before I took off my jacket, I would turn on the television, black and white, of course, and Mamie and I would watch. And I don't remember much of those games, but I do vividly remember that last moment of that last game, of that last out, when Pee Wee Reese, the catcher, ran to the mound and picked up Johnny Padres, the pitcher, in his arms. Mamie and I started shrieking and jumping up and down and hugging each other. What a glorious moment, just pure joy. Okay. Around that time, I had been asking Mamie if I could visit her in her apartment. I was curious about what it was like, and I also wanted to see Annette. Annette didn't like me very much, understandably, because she would come home after school every day to an empty apartment, and Mamie would be off in another place taking care of another child. And she would also come home and talk about her day, and what was her day being with me. It was unfair. So Mamie and I got off the bus, and we got to her building, and we went to the basement apartment. It was dark, and all the colors were muted. The furniture, the drapes, I don't remember seeing windows. And I started to think about how poor she really was. She asked me if I wanted anything to eat, and I said yes. And she had once brought Spam to the house, and I actually had liked it. And so I asked for a piece of Spam, and she heated it up. But somehow it tasted completely different, and I couldn't eat it. And Mamie got really upset with me. And I said, "Can't you reheat it?" She said, "No." I still have shame for that moment that I've never forgotten. Mamie called my parents Mr. and Mrs. Rosenberg. So my father always called her Mrs. Durante. He would come home, he would drive home after work, and in the winter, he'd be driving along the concourse, and he would see this lonely figure standing out there. It was freezing, it was dark, and he would just turn his car around and pick her up and take her home. As an adult, I worked with women very much like Mamie for over 20 years, helping them get out of poverty and reach their dreams. Mamie had a really hard life, but she had great strength and pride, and she brought stability, safety, and affection into my life. I'm always grateful. Thank you.